okay, so we're finally doing this, right? I was meant to start this 2 years ago, and I just didn't, right? I had an experimental one with someone called United Cloud. Some of you may have heard of him. I had one back like 3 years ago, I think it was. 3.5, 4 years ago maybe. And it was this NBA, NFL. It's meant to be like a doodle with a couple of guys I know. And we just never actually did it properly. So this one, I'm going to try and do properly. So for those of you who already know me, TikTok or Twitter or various different places, I'm assuming it's one of those. So if you found me from anywhere else, I'd be slightly alarmed, but we'll go along with it. And for those of you who don't, my name is Mustafa. I talk about sports, and that's all you'll really get from me, unless for some reason you want to have other pieces of information and my opinions about other things. But here we go. So the first topic of how this thing will generally run is I will have a general main meat topic, which I've got from Twitter, TikTok comments, whatever. So this time I got it from Twitter from a couple of guys. Shout out, I'm Ziz Pomps, he's the one who came up with the initial idea. Then you should check his TikTok out, he's got 50,000, he's cool. And a couple of questions which I've got, mainly one which actually really interests me, which I found in TikTok comments, but I'm going to cover that as well. So the first one is I'm going to be covering Kylian Mbappe in general, hence the PSG share. I'm not buying a Real Madrid Mbappe because he's going to change it next year anyway. I don't see the point. So the main one is that someone asked me to talk about his progression as a player and how he's going to fit into this Real Madrid team. So with that being said, that's the first thing I'm going to start off with. Obviously with Mbappe joining a Champions League winning side, one of the main things that people are thinking about is how is he necessarily going to fit. Vinicius likes the left wing, Rodrigo likes the left wing, Bellingham likes the left spaces. Mbappe has been noted to make a complaint about playing as a central number 9. So how's that going to play out? And it's a valid question, but I don't believe it's going to be any sort of an issue at all. So first of all, I'm going to go through his progression as a player, starting from Monaco to his PSG days, and ultimately to what we have of him as a player now, even up to this past Euros. And then I'm going to address how he fits in with the 3 players that I just mentioned. So obviously when Mbappe first came into the scene, he sort of burst out of nowhere. People knew who he was in the game and this and that. I had someone who told me about him. I just sort of paid it no mind. And then I actually watched the guy play and I was like, Jesus Christ, I love him. So in his first season, where he only really started playing regularly around the winter time, November, December time, he didn't start the season in the lineup. He ended the season 28 goals and 14 assists in 46 games. I have it as down here. He was very low on touches though, and he played largely off of the front man, which tended to be Radamel Falcao. Played off him, get around 22, 23 touches a game in a largely transitional role. He was largely off the ball. He was floating around him as a second striker, left, right, number 9, filling in behind him, being a connector of sorts, and being a ruthless goal scorer, which he's been known to do all throughout his career now. So, that point of his career, it was very, very simple for him because of the fact that the wingers were wider, the entire central areas of the pitch were for him, and everything was not congested, and Monaco were very quick to get through the transitions. You had Mendy, you had midfields, you had Fabinho ball carrying up. Moutinho was a very willing passer. I'm pretty sure Moutinho was there. And Bernardo's obviously very willing to carry the ball and be direct. It's only since he got to Manchester City that he turned into a much less direct player. And Lamar, lefty on the left wing, we know what they like to do. Get up and down, put crosses into the box, and when you have a target man like Falcao in there, lovely. Mbappe's movement off the ball, particularly at that point, was excellent. Especially for a guy just coming through, he was just 18 years old at that point. For him to be able to move off the ball the way he did at that point in time was ridiculous. So you had him doing that there, and people can see the talent immediately, and then he goes off to France, he does the same thing, connectivity, connective tissue passing, he's doing all the things which you'd want from a top-tier central prospect, did all that, and that is ultimately what led to the move at PSG. Now, in terms of how that guy moved, and how he would have potentially fit into Madrid, I made a video on that on TikTok, and ultimately I don't think it would have been a right move from him at that time. He would have played off the right, and maybe he would have got more on-ball responsibility, but the education which he got at Paris Saint-Germain from certain players, which I'll go into now, was immense. I mean, his touches per game, like I said, they're just 23 per game. Like, that's insanely low for what he is now. Because the next season in 2018, when he was still largely off the ball, was double that. He had 43 touches per game when he was playing off the right. Now, during his time here, this was the first season of the Neymar-Mbappe duo. At this point, it wasn't even a duo. It was Neymar doing stupid stuff on a week-to-week basis. He was dribbling, creating. but it wasn't creating in the sense of a pure number 10. He was creating more as Messi would. Pass the ball, get the ball back into a final pass. He wasn't circulating, he wasn't initiating, he wasn't setting offensive motions into play as a true number 10 would. He was just doing things as a winger who could come inside with ridiculous technical ability to do on a day-to-day basis. So what Mbappe was doing there was essentially hold width, stay out wide, make runs inside, stretch the back line, and then when you have the opportunity to come inside and pick up the ball, when you do pick up the ball in semi-transitions and in settled play, you go at your fullback or you come inside and you recycle the ball and you let the sequence start again with Thiago Motta and Marco Verratti. Those would be the guys, obviously the tempo setters in midfield. And sometimes you'd have a third guy in there depending on who it was. Or on other occasions, sometimes you would have Neymar in the 10, but he'd be operating as a dribble first guy as opposed to a pass first guy like he was later in his career. That season, that was by far, I think, his most inefficient season in front of goal. He had 21 goals and 16 assists in 46 games. Now that's fine. It's nothing crazy. The assist numbers are about what they were at Monaco. He was very largely off the wing. He was a bit further away from the goals. You can see in his heat maps, you can see in his touch maps to a lesser degree. Getting up and down, beating his fullback, putting crosses into the box. And he's very good at that. I remember he had I saw a clip earlier of him playing against Cannes. He beat 2-3 players in one move. Zips up ball into the box, Cavani's there. Chipped across 2 or 3 other passes. And again, he's fantastic. Everything he was doing during there was directed at getting a goal. He's a very direct player even at that point. At that point, it still wasn't right for him to move, even though what we saw at the World Cup showed that he was already a top 5-ish player in the world, top 5, top 10. He was going at guys, he was making those same runs in behind that he was making with PSG. It's just the difference was, in France, the lines are very low, they're very physical, they're very stick their studs into your kneecap type thing. In the World Cup, with France being very much reserved, lines come up about 10-15 yards and there's more space for Mbappe to move into, there's more space for him to carry the ball and kick it and chase into. Like he was doing at certain points for France and being their primary creator and being their best offensive option. Now, into his next season. This is where Mbappe really asserted himself as one of the 5 best players in the world. But at the end of this year, I had him 4th. I had Neymar, Messi, Van Dijk, and then I had Mbappe in there. He was ahead of Cristiano by this point. Salah, Van Dijk, Mane, Hazard, whoever you wanted. This season was a season where Mbappe really turned himself into those all-world conversations which have catapulted him to where he is today. And that, after which, I believe is the season which Madrid should have first made a move to sign him, and I'll go into why potentially they couldn't at that particular point in time in just a minute. So that season he had 39 and 17. And this was actually probably the version, and again I'll go into this slightly deeper later, when he could have gone into a centre-forward type role which would have benefited Madrid long term. So 18-19, this is where Tuchel comes in, he puts Neymar as the 10 and he puts an emphasis on, okay, don't be as direct, don't be as focused on scoring, assisting every single time down, focus on initiating the attacks, playing as more of a midfielder, picking the ball up deeper, circulating things in. And that ultimately, with him being in the 10 and Tuchel playing a slightly more fluid system in the final third relative to what other coaches may have done, that allows Mbappe to come further inside and Neymar and Mbappe not close to each other. They can establish the first steps of their associations as partners, right? Those two duck inside, 1-2s, interchange positions, because Neymar's very comfortable in right half spaces and the right wing even as well, being able to jink past guys, just in flashes, not on a regular basis, but just enough. Mbappe comes inside, he links well with Cavani. Other times it was Mbappe comes inside, Cavani runs the channels, and Neymar drifts out to the left. It's all a very fluid, flexible system which Tuchel implemented at PSG, which is why it looked so good, particularly when Neymar was healthy before he broke his foot for the second time. So at that particular point in time, what Neymar was doing for Paris Saint-Germain was allowing them to bring out the best of Mbappe at that particular point in time. But nonetheless, Mbappe was still very much a connectivity, link-up type guy who is excellent at the final third and excellent in the final pass, but he's still very much a guy whose primary objective is to stretch the defence, be a goal scorer in behind, and when you can, attack a guy on a fullback, particularly for the first half of the season. Now, the first shift where we saw him for a considerable stretch as a number 9 was in the second half of that 18-19 season, which was when he played as which was when Neymar broke his foot and Mbappe began to transition further inside, took more responsibility on the ball, And then when Cavani popped his hamstring, which was literally 4 days before the Champions League tie, which really annoyed me because I'm a United fan and I had tickets for the United game, United PSG game, so I went to that. So first when Neymar broke his foot, I was very upset. Now Cavani pulled his hamstring and I'm infuriated. Obviously I still went. And Verratti put on a clinic that night. School Pogba. Crazy game. That was a great watch. But so what ended up happening from there is that Mbappe now has to take a role which is further inside, and the front three ends up becoming Di Maria and one other guy on the wing, whether it be Draxler, whether it be Choupo-Moting at times, whoever it ended up being. Nkunku would slot in there sometimes every now and then, because of the fact that PSG just didn't have adequate depth up front, really. They could have made use of Nkunku, but ultimately they didn't enough, and I think he was shipped off at the end of that season. I'm sure it was that season. So when he goes from there, this is his first stretch now playing as number 9. Connective tissue, back to goal, link-up play, runs in transitions. He's the guy who you can bounce passes off. He'll drop deeper. You make those runs beyond. That's the first flash that we got of him playing as an actual number 9, and that's the point at which that is the biggest evidence that he will be a success at Madrid, playing in the role which he ultimately will end up playing as, which is as a connective tissue number 9. I think who also scores an absolute ton of goals. So that was him in 18-19. And he scored a load of goals that season, like I said, 39 and 17, and it was pretty evenly spread throughout the season. He didn't score. I mean, I remember he scored like 5 in the last 3 to really boost. I think Monaco, maybe Stade Brest, I don't remember. And then maybe one in the final game of the season as well before the Coup de France final. But pretty much he ended the season on a nice run. And he missed actually the final couple. He missed a couple of games towards the end of the year as well because he got a red card in that Coup de France final, which was very annoying. I watched that after Endgame. That was annoying. But away from that. So 18-19, that was the first flashes of which we saw him as a number 9. That was the first flashes which we saw of him being able to play in a connective, associative type of style, which doesn't require him to be isolated in a lot of space and require him to be in a strict positional play because of the fact that he can connect with players to such a high degree outside of the time which he was at Monaco. He hadn't done it for almost 2 years by that point. Now we're going to 19-20, and he had a slight uptick in his touches this year, and that is because of the fact that Thomas Tuchel brought him further central for the first time in Mbappe's PSG tenure. But it wasn't as a lone number 9, that's the important part. He was as a second striker. So PSG at the start of that season made a mistake, I think. I understood it, but I still think they made a mistake. They brought in Icardi to replace Cavani, and as good as Icardi can be as a poacher, he's not the guy you want because of the fact that he's worse at pretty much everything outside of sniping than Cavani, who's obviously, as a lot of you will know, he's a bit of an erratic finisher. He's not someone who you really want on the end of chances as a really reliable finisher at the end of games. He's a guy who generates a lot of chances, but he's also a guy who's going to miss a lot of chances. So 19-20, Mbappe went up to 51 touches a game. He was in that left-wing second striker role for large stretches of the year, because for a lot of the time, PSG would play with a 4-2-2-2, very split, very horizontal, very parallel system. You would have 2 midfielders, Verratti, and they brought in Gay that season. So Verratti and Gay a lot of the time were the 2 together. And then you'd have Neymar on one side, you'd have Di Maria on the other, and then you'd have Mbappe and Icardi as the front 2. Mbappe being in that left side, he'd be more floating across the entire front line. He'd be more so linking up with Neymar to allow Neymar to come inside, and he plays as the number 10, and Mbappe plays off the left. And those 2 can interchange as and when you need them to. So that was the first person we got. That was also Mbappe's, I'm guessing on a per game basis. Another thing is that number was his highest productivity to that point in his career, 30 and 18 and 37. And he popped his hamstring to start the season as well, so he missed about maybe 8 to 10 games to start the year because he popped it in August and he didn't come back until I want to say October, because one of his first games back he got a hat-trick against Bruges, and that was the 3rd Champions League game, I think. I don't remember exactly, 2nd or 3rd. No, it had to be 3rd because they played Madrid in match day 5. So that was his first fresh play in there, and he was allowed to stretch and drift, float wherever he wanted on the pitch, him and Neymar, even Di Maria to a lesser degree. And the end result was something which was probably the most beautiful stretch of football that we've ever seen from PSG, when they were headed up by Neymar as the key 10, and then Mbappe floating wherever he wants. And like I said, his touches went up in that season, and that is the largest stretch that we got of him. And again, this will be very important to how it overlays into how he fits into his Real Madrid system and how he fits in with his Real Madrid teammates later in this season, because of the fact that he showed that he could play as part of a front 2, floating as a second striker, when he had a bit of a boosted ego and he's willing to do those types of things. Now, 2021. This was probably, from this point on, by the way, PSG's season has just got more and more turbulent for the next few years, up until his final season, which he had with Enrique. So 2021, they start the season off with Tuchel. Mbappe is a bit of a dry spell to start the season. He's not performing particularly well. Neymar's having to drag him through. He had a bit of a drought in the Champions League. Neymar gave him a gimme penalty, which I don't even know who won, to be honest. It might have been Neymar. Neymar played magnificent in that game. This was against a Turkish team, which I can't remember the name of. But towards the end of this, Tuchel was sacked, and they brought in Pochettino. They had a big hole to climb out of in Ligue 1 because of the fact of what happened. Like, it was just a poor start to the season. Lille played fantastically well, and as a result, you end up having a side with PSG who are ahead of PSG when ultimately they never should be. At this point, Pochettino went well into the 4-3, which got PSG into the Champions League final in that little mini KO stage tournament, where they had Neymar false nine, Mbappe off the left and Di Maria off the right. And what this got Mbappe was ultimately his highest scoring stretch towards the end of the season. And to that point, that was also his highest scoring season. It's his second highest scoring season in terms of goals numbers. He had 42 and 11 to close that season. In 47 games, his touches were around the same, just 50. It was because of the fact that, again, him and Neymar's relationship didn't really change between 20 and 21. They played basically the exact same. It's just that they took out Icardi and they put in an extra midfielder in there, which is ultimately what they needed to do. And Tuchel realised that after the game against Borussia Dortmund, and Pochettino ended that. He took what Tuchel built and he just let them do the same thing in those Champions League games. The problem was the league games for various reasons, but stuff happens with that as well. So that season was very much him just off the left, stretching the pitch, going inside, wing play, making those runs inside, into play with Neymar. Those two switch positions a lot. And it was generally just great to watch. So, and in 21-22, this is Mbappe's most responsibility he's had as a player throughout his career. It's also his highest numbers, 39 and 26. 65 goal involvements. Now that is up there with anyone that you can possibly want. In terms of output seasons on a per game basis, it was ridiculous. 65 and 46. Didn't even play 50 games, didn't hit that many. That was immense. So at that point in time, that was obviously the time where you got Messi and Neymar in. Pochettino, this is his only full season in charge. Pochettino couldn't find the right mix. So at the start of the season, the blend was Messi off the right, Neymar off the left, and Mbappe through the middle. That clearly didn't work because Messi can't run anymore. Neymar looked physically washed, and Mbappe is the line. He wasn't big enough or bulky enough to really lead the line as a lone striker at that point in time without someone going beyond him. If he has someone going beyond him and he can be a connective guy, then that's fine. But if he has to be the highest guy on the pitch, then it's not going to work. Now, what we got to a little bit later in the season was you had Messi as a false nine, Neymar off the left, and then you had Mbappe off the right, which to that point was also a very good setup as well. You have Mbappe just making those runs similar to what he had at the beginning of his PSG career, so for the first 18 months. And that also worked, and it also got Mbappe a decent amount of production, but again, it's not ideal, is it? Later on through the season, specifically when Neymar rolled his ankle completely over and he got injured, I think it was either against Nantes or Saint-Etienne, I don't remember which team because I was at work. And then, so at that point, Mbappe shifts over to the left, Di Maria comes in for Neymar, Messi plays false nine through the middle, and at that point you get PSG just doing stupid stuff because of the fact you have the wonderfully balanced front three that you had in 1920 and 2021. Just the only difference is you get Lionel Messi in for Neymar. Now, was Messi better than Neymar at that point? I don't think so. So I think it was a slight downgrade, but ultimately, does it really matter? No, because the difference is negligible. You have Di Maria off the right. He can be the balancer. He's the guy who's going short, going long, going behind, can play the passing behind, can be a bit of a progressor of the pitch as well. So it's genuinely not a problem whatsoever that you have those guys. And that season, no surprise, Mbappe got to 60 touches again. His only season to that point, which he got 60 touches again. And that is because ultimately he had the most responsibility. Messi at that point, because of the fact his legs were totally physically shot, couldn't totally drop deep into the midfield anymore, and he needed to stay high with the pitch to maintain his efficacy up there in terms of as a final passer. Neymar also couldn't drop deeper because of the fact that, again, he was physically washed. So for large stretches of the season, Mbappe was being the primary progressor, creator, and scorer for PSG, which is frankly insane because of the fact that there's only been 3 guys this century who've managed to shoulder that burden. First guy was Thierry Henry for Arsenal. He was the creator, progressor, and scorer. Then we saw that mainly in 2002, 2006-ish. This was when Bergkamp fully left. And then we saw it with Messi, obviously a large stretch of 2015 to 2019 every single season. Well, honestly, till the end of his Barcelona stretch. And so even if you want to go to 2021, and then we saw it with Neymar in 2018, 2019, and 2020, albeit to a lesser degree in 2020. So we got that, and that was Mbappe's most responsibility today. He created most assists, he created a bunch of big chances. He was the guy. He was often deeper than Messi, even in semi-transitions. I remember towards the end of the season, they had a game against Strasbourg, and one of Mbappe's creations, it was a semi-transition. Mbappe picks up the ball, Messi's 15 yards in front of him, slaps it right in front of him, and Messi takes it around the keeper and slots it away. I think Messi scored 2 that game. I don't remember what the other goal was, but I remember the second one. So what Mbappe did from there was great, and at that point, he was at his most nimble, most agile, most athletic, most fluid in terms of the way he was dribbling and moving around. That is the point at which he ultimately should have gone to Real Madrid. He didn't because of various different reasons, but I don't want to go into that, and it wasn't just money. Now, 22-23, Poch is given the boot because he failed to get them deep into the Champions League, which was more Donnarumma and Marquinhos' fault than it was his, but the league performance wasn't great either, and this and that, so I understand why they got rid of him. Gaultier comes in, and he moves Mbappe into the number 9 position, which I was speaking about, that Pochettino initially tried to put him in, and then he realised it didn't work, which was Mbappe as the line leading guy. You have Messi and Neymar as the 2 10s. Those two connect and link with each other, and Mbappe is a guy who links in behind. He's a guy who plays the wall passes. Now, having Mbappe playing as Olivier Giroud pacing behind in settled play really is not the best of ideas. Now, ultimately, he did still get decent touch numbers, albeit these come from later in the season when Neymar ruined his ankle again. I think he tore his ankle and broke it for the 3rd time or something. They didn't play it off the left. This was after Mbappe pulled his hamstring. So Mbappe, at this point, again, he still has about 55, 56 touches a game, and he managed to break in, and he was now doing what he did. Him and Messi, again, were linking up very, very well. But the actual time when it was just Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe, those 3 didn't function together as a trio. And thankfully, they never actually really did in the big Champions League game outside of maybe 20 minutes against Bayern, where they looked very dangerous. And that was the season where he played full 9. And that's the season which, if he plays that type of 9 at Madrid, it probably won't work too well because it relies on ultimately top tier 10s coming in and creating as well, but I don't think Carlo's going to do that. Now, the last season, 24, his touch tally is at his lowest since 2019 when he had 44 touches again, and he was playing as a right wing / number 9 for stretches. That's because Enrique is the most positionally restrictive coach that Mbappe has had to this point in his career. He was saying, Mbappe, just stick to the left wing, you blitz guys, and you make runs in behind, and you come inside when there's an opportunity to score, and things like that. That, to this point, is his least impressive season that I've seen of him play in terms of total responsibility since he became an all-around player. This is still him clearly as the best player in the world, miles ahead of everyone else, but ultimately, he didn't get the opportunity to show the stuff that he could do at the end of 2023 and even at the end of, and even during the entirety of 2022, resulting in a massive disappointment, and even at the World Cup when he was being allowed to do everything for France. Now, does it change the ability of who the player is? No, because he was just as efficient in front of goal. He was scoring just as much. His final pass was just as good, even with just the 10 assists. And he had 40 goals in back-to-back seasons. But ultimately, what he was doing was too restrictive. It was too held in nature. And as a result, you got a less effective version of him, even though he's more rounded now. He's bigger, he's stronger. His back-to-goal play is significantly better than it was the last time he had to play lone number 9. And his passing range is significantly better. Now, at this point, the only part that is a worry is Carlo going to put them into the right places? So, that's all of that business. Now, in terms of where I think that his touch tally is going to be, it's going to be somewhere between 55 and 60 for Madrid, I think. And his goal tally will be something around 45 and maybe 15 to 20 assists or something like that. Now, in terms of how the actual fit will go, and this is where the actual information on the Madrid guys comes into play. So, Vinicius, Bellingham, and Rodrigo. Rodrigo is going to be the guy to fall from this. He is generally quite a low-touch guy anyway. So, he did not become a regular starter until 2023, and even when he does play, he only averages around 45 touches a game across the last 2 seasons. By the way, all these touch counts are all leagues because of the fact that this is where really the fit's going to come into question. It won't really come into question in Champions Leagues because of the fact that things are more transition and players naturally get their touches in space as opposed to in settled play. So, in terms of how Vinny, Rodrigo, and Mbappe were put together, Rodrigo's touch can't likely go even further down. He'll probably be, if anything, he'll stay around 45, but he'll probably be around 40-ish for large stretches. Lesser impact. His job at this point will likely to be hold width. When one guy, you chop and change. When they want to come out, you come in type thing. It's very much a rotation, but he relies on the other guy to make the rotation, and then he follows up and he fills the gaps. His ability as a linker player, as a connective tissue player, that won't be maximised to the same degree. When it comes to Vinny didn't become a regular starter until 2021, but he is not the same player then as he was now, as shown by touch count. The reason why I use touches is because of the fact that that is simply the amount of influence we have on the pitch. For example, in 2017, I think Neymar had something like 85 touches as opposed to 65 touches for Messi, because of the fact that Neymar was a guy who had more responsibility on the pitch when it comes to total creativity and things like that. Obviously, it's not the exact thing which you need to do, but it's somewhat of a big factor, in my view. In 2022, his touch tally went up 20 touches. He up to 56. Last season it was 60. No, the season 23 was a 60, and this past season it was a 46. Naturally, because of the fact he's now as a lone 9 and he's having to stretch the pitch, needs to be more disciplined in terms of when he comes back to the ball, as opposed to being the guy who can drop into the midfield, pick up the ball and razz up the pitch with his left wing. And Bellingham, his touches actually haven't taken a hit since Borussia Dortmund to Madrid. His will likely stay the same. So, in terms of how it will work as a front three, I think it'll be very simple. Vinny off the left, Rodrigo off the right, and Mbappe through the middle. Now, the reason why Mbappe will gladly play as a number 9 here, as opposed to playing for Messi and Neymar, is because for the first time in his career, Mbappe has guys who are willing to go beyond him every single time. Kolo Muani and Barcola tried, but that's not really their natural game. Vinicius has a real good awareness of when to go, when to stay, when to shoot in behind, and when to link. Rodrigo has also has a very high football IQ in terms of when to narrow, when to stretch, all those things like that. So that will allow Madrid to be very flexible, and Mbappe to drop deep, and he can play a sort of initiator role as and when he needs to do. And also at the same time, because Vinicius and Rodrigo spent this last season playing large stretches as split strikers, and they were interchanging for each other, both of them are very comfortable playing on the opposite wing to what they normally play, and both of them are very comfortable in central areas, which means that Mbappe can drift out to the left and the right on a very regular basis. So it will very much look like a combination of what we saw in 18-19, 19-20, and 21-22. 21-22 in terms of the touch counts and the amount of responsibility that Mbappe takes on the pitch, and the amount that he comes in driving Real Madrid up the pitch. In terms of 18-19 and 19-20, it'll be very much flexible, him making passes beyond those guys. If you want a game from this past season to look at, choose the game where PSG played Dortmund and it was in Borussia Dortmund, the group stage game. Because that game, they had Mbappe, I want to say Barcola, I don't remember exactly though, and then Kolo Muani off the right. Mbappe's entire game that game was you're direct, you're dribbling, you go at guys, and you initiate the attack, and you hit guys passing in behind. So Kolo Muani was making runs in behind on a regular basis in that game, even though if his runs aren't necessarily the best timed, or he messes up the final action, he at least has someone to hit going in behind, which he hasn't had on a regular basis for a long time. Rodrigo doesn't mess up final actions to the same degree. Vinicius doesn't mess up final actions to the same degree. So what we'll ultimately get is the most well-rounded version of Mbappe and a wonderfully balanced front three. That is as long as they play with the front three. I don't think they will. I think they will stretch into a 4-4-2/4-4-2 diamond. I think ultimately what we'll see is the same thing that we saw at the end of the season. I think we'll see Camavinga and Tchouaméni. Kroos obviously is gone now instead of Camavinga. So it'll be those two. And then you have Bellingham and Valverde wider. So Valverde off the right, obviously, Bellingham off the left. And then you'll have split strikers of Mbappe and Vinicius. Rodrigo off the bench as an impact sub. So what we'll end up getting there is Bellingham almost playing behind those two at certain stretches when they have possession of the ball. And he's the guy who links up, he crashes the box, and he's the guy who makes runs beyond Mbappe, beyond Vinicius. When Mbappe and Vinicius are on the wing, Bellingham's the guy who's going into the box to crash the box and head it. So that's what we'll ultimately end up seeing at large stretches. That's how I think it will end up fitting. So in terms of how the fit will be, it will be Mbappe dropping deeper and making passes beyond, as well as making runs in semi-transition, and those guys looking to find him. And then obviously when they have Bellingham, it will be largely similar. It's just the fact that it's a lot more narrow, and guys will only go wide as and when they see the need to. So people who have worries over the way they fit together, I understand it, but there's absolutely no need to worry over it. Because realistically, these guys are all smart, they're all intelligent football players. and we'll get to the right end result. So that is Mbappe moving on to Real Madrid. So that is the main topic. I'm sure with time goes on I'll come up with more. I'm trying not to have these go too long because I have a tendency to ramble. You got to think this one just here has lasted for half an hour. So a couple of questions that I've stolen from the TikTok stuff. So the first one I want to talk about is Barcelona and their flops. So specifically when they had Messi. So this one just came in today. And it was, why did Coutinho and Griezmann flop? So I'm going to talk about those two. I'm also going to talk about Dembele and his flopping. And there was one comment who actually put in response and said it's largely to do with Lionel Messi. Now that pins it on Messi in an unfair way. Like, he asked for those guys and he actively tried to make them fail, which he obviously didn't. But yeah, Messi's a big reason for that. It's failings of the board because of the fact that you get guys in the form of Griezmann and Coutinho. I'm going to address those two first and I'll talk about Dembele after. Griezmann and Coutinho, who are ultimately number 10s. They like to play in opposite half spaces. Griezmann likes the right half space in the central zone. Coutinho likes the left half space in the central zone. But ultimately, there's no need to have a ball-to-feet midfielder, and especially in the case of Coutinho, one who doesn't have extreme lung capacity to track back and really involve himself in the general play because of the fact he doesn't have the engine of some all-time great midfielders. There's no need for those types of guys because of the fact that ultimately you have Lionel Messi who does that, and he is a better creator, he's a better dribbler, he's got a better final passing, he's got a better mind, he's got a better eye for a pass than every single one of these guys that you can bring in. The only guy who has a better one in world football, particularly at that point, was his ex-teammate in the form of Neymar. And with him gone, there's no point in trying to replicate what he had. But it's ultimately what was tried to do in the form of Dembele, and that brutally failed. So Coutinho and Griezmann, they come in, and it's far from an ideal situation because of especially Griezmann. Like, Coutinho went through stretches where it looked okay, but Griezmann and Messi, they're like the same areas, they're like the same positions on the pitch. It makes no logical sense to have those two together because of the fact that they're going to do the same things on the pitch. They want to operate from the same areas on the pitch. And as a result, you just have two guys who have extremely redundant skill sets because of the fact that Messi can dribble better than them, yeah. But outside of that, the two are basically very, very similar at that point. Griezmann does not want twos as much as Messi, but you get the point. So yeah, it was a poor fit. It was a poor buy by the Barcelona team, and there was no need to spend 100 million on that guy. No wonder they were in a poor financial position. When it comes to Coutinho, his was more due to poorly identified. Coutinho had less to do with Messi because you can have that guy in midfield as a guy to almost take the progressive burden off Messi, which he had to an extreme degree in the 17-18 and 18-19 season. Basically to the end of his period with Barcelona. He couldn't even he couldn't take a momentary rest and leave it to Neymar this time or Suarez or Iniesta. All he had was Coutinho. So Coutinho gave him a little break on the opposite side, let him go off the ball a bit more. But ultimately it still wasn't large enough for Messi to really get a significant break, which is ultimately why he ended up struggling and to be out of gas towards the end of the season. Just because you're not supposed to do that much when you're on the ball, especially when you're, at that point, 30, 31, 32 years old. Messi turned 32 in 2019 that season, that's nuts. But, and obviously Coutinho with the long shot ability, he's more of a maverick than Griezmann is. But he also needs to be the creative hub too much, which is ultimately why Liverpool's other guys got more of a bounce when he left in terms of output and efficiency. And Barcelona's guys, Coutinho struggled to fit in, and they struggled to fit in around him because he needs to be the hub, which you can't be when Lionel Messi is there. When it comes to Dembele, that was just a poor buy. There is absolutely that one had less to do with Messi and more to do with Dembele's reluctance to ever run in behind as a player, which he's only shown flashes of doing this season with PSG when he finally made back post runs. And he was finally making some sort of runs beyond for Mbappe, and even then it's not natural to him. He likes having the ball at his feet, he likes to feel the ball, play with it, all things like that. Which is fine, it just doesn't maximise the team around him, especially when Lionel Messi. And you have no threat in behind, because Suarez also is no longer a threat to the defence in behind, and you don't want to run in behind, and you can't run in behind. That was not necessarily his fault as much as it was them not pushing to sign Mbappe. Now, would Mbappe have gone to Barcelona? Based on what we've seen in his presentation, absolutely not. There is no chance he would have gone there. But you at least make the bid. 200 million, put it in, see what happens. Because Messi and Mbappe would have been a frightening duo along with Suarez. That would have been better than MSN. Because of the fact that Mbappe is a better threat in behind, he's a better one-on-one dribbler, and he's a better finisher than Neymar. So that would have been the prerequisite thing there. Alternatively, you can't get Mbappe Instead of signing Coutinho, go after Mane, go after Aubameyang, go after one of those guys. Because ultimately, they will do what you need to maximise Messi at that point in his career. Mane was world class in multiple different roles, whether it was as the right wing creator, as a guy who comes in behind and he creates every now and then, as a left wing, just a guy who's a bit of a poacher, as a guy who's wing play poacher type goals, as a left wing as a primary creative source. I think I've already mentioned false nine, but he played world class in 4 separate roles: as the creator from the left wing as a number 10, as the scoring poacher, as the false 9, and as the do-it-all right winger. He had world class stretches in 4 different positions because he's so smart and because he's got an excellent physical base and all those different things. You play him as the guy who strictly runs it behind for Messi. Barcelona win Champions League upon Champions League. Same with Aubameyang. Aubameyang, all he has to do if he plays for Barcelona is just run in behind every single time. Just make that same out-to-in run. Let Messi hit you every single time. Suarez can be the connective tissue guy. He drops deeper. You fill his space. And all you've got to do is finish the chances. If they do that, Barcelona win the 2018, probably the 2019 Champions League with the amount of space Liverpool leave in behind. And maybe even 2020, even with how bad they were. Because of the fact that regardless of how badly they got battered in the 8-2 Bayern Munich game, when the game was still in touch, Messi created about 4 or 5 chances for guys who don't even run him behind. So, genuinely, it was fantastic. It was fantastic if they would have got those guys in. But unfortunately, they didn't. Even like a guy like Sterling, Leroy Sané, whoever you need to get in, just get a run it in behind and you're in the best position that you would have been in absolute years. The most balanced front three that you would have had. So, yeah, that was just poor recruitment by them. Now, the other question that I found was really interesting was, what if Lionel Messi, instead of being picked up by Barcelona when he was a kid, what if he was picked up by Real Madrid? Now that would have been something. Because ultimately, a huge reason why Messi plays the way he does today is because of the way he played and the way he was taught from age 12 or 13 coming up through the La Masia Academy. He was taught, okay, don't lose the ball, possession, strict positional senses of play. You stay in yours. So he grew up as a right winger. You stay on the right wing, right? You don't move from there. You attack. Maybe you come inside sometimes, but not very often at all. That's your primary role, right? And obviously the same principles were in play when he played with Pep. 2009 to 2012, you stay in the middle third of the pitch, the width of the penalty box. You don't leave there. You run at guys in the middle of the pitch because of the fact that there's 360 degrees for you to attack as opposed to just 180 where they can block you off. So, if he were to go to Real Madrid, his entire football education changes. So, the basis on technique and things like that still remain the same. But Real Madrid have always been a much more free-flowing, freedom-inducing type of environment for the top players. So, you have a guy in the form of Ronaldo, Zidane, Figo, Beckham, all these guys. None of them are particularly restrictive, stuck players type thing. They aren't guys who stick to their position. So, if he grows up with them, and he grows up in the Madrid Academy, he probably has a much more free-flowing game. And I believe there's 3 possible outcomes had he grown up at Real Madrid. So, the first outcome, which I believe is the least likely, is he struggles to break into the 11. Because Madrid in 2006, their wing pairing for long stretches was Beckham and Robinho. And it was the same in the year after for large stretches. At this point, they didn't have Ronaldo, they didn't have Kaká. Figo was gone, and Figo at that point was more of a midfielder anyway towards the end of his career. So that was what we ended up seeing there. And when it comes to what we would have seen, he would have likely broken in because Robinho was extremely inconsistent. Now, the question is, what type of player would he have functioned? What type of player would he have grown into in his prime? So, struggles to break in and goes away and thrives somewhere else. I think that would have been Italy. Well documented, Inter Milan were willing to pay 100 and something million for him to Barcelona when he was a kid. Italian clubs still had some money in the early 2000s, maybe in Milan, maybe Inter Milan. I think he's more likely to go to Inter at that point in time just because of the fact that Milan seems to like Brazilians, Inter seem to like Argentinians, right? They have a rich history of some Argentinians in their setups. So I think that's where he ends up going. Obviously, they do have Brazilian Ronaldo as well, and some other like Adriano, guys like that. But for the most part, I associate Argentina more with Inter Milan than I do with the other side. I think he goes there, breaks in, he becomes one of the best players in the world there. Ultimately, I don't know how it ends up going from there. That's just how I think it goes. That's just how I think it ends up going. Because I'm not talking about his actual end product as a player. I'm just talking about what actually ends up going and how he ends up leaving. And the reason I said it isn't because he wouldn't have been good enough to break into the Madrid lineup. It's just because Madrid are always looking to sign new players. They're always looking for the new shiny toy, right? We've seen evidence of this all throughout history. It's not a new thing. Even if they have players in their position, they will still go and out and get other players for a position which they don't even necessarily need. So that's one of Madrid's weaknesses, if you will. Like, they wouldn't have allowed Messi to break into the lineup. If he did, I believe it ends in one of two ways. So the second likely one, I believe he would turn into a second striker / number 10 type thing. But he wouldn't be a number 10 in the way that a Maradona would be, or even a Neymar would be, or a Zidane would be, or slightly lesser players, say like an Ozil would be. Not slightly, well, way lesser players like Ozil would be. Which is connective tissue. You circulate play, you set the attack in motion as opposed to just being the guy to make the final pass. Messi would be a guy who would be super direct. He picks up the ball 30 to 40 yards from goal, dribble, drive, 1-2, bing, bang, bosh, hits guys who are making that running behind, hits that final pass, and ultimately that's what you get. If he was playing at that, I think that would actually be his most productive version as a player in this hypothetical universe. I think he'd be at 35 to 40 goals a season because he'd be one of the more direct number 10s. He'd be more in the vein of a second striker and get around 25, 30, 35 assists because he'd still be creating a huge amount for the rest of his teammates. And ultimately, he'd be doing his job then. Now, would he be getting the same goal? Would he have the same gaudy numbers that he has now? No, of course not. 50. Like, even Messi peak productive season, not his best as a player, was 70 and 30. That's insane. He wouldn't hit that if he were to play at Real Madrid in that setup, but it would still be fantastic nonetheless. And this is what I think the most likely outcome I think would be 2008 Lionel Messi just on lots and lots of steroids. A guy who scores a lot, creates a lot, 25 goals, 25, 30 goals-ish, 30, 35 assists. I don't think his assist numbers actually take a hit because I still think he can come inside. It's just that because he's further away from the goal, it wouldn't hit. Although I don't think he'd be at the 35 assist range. I think he'd be more like 25 to 30. It's like maybe 27, 28 type. As opposed to 33, 35. What we'd end up seeing there is a guy who runs at defenders, causes double teams constantly, bing, bash, 1-2, crosses into the box towards... Who did Madrid have a striker? I want to say Van Nistelrooy they had at that point in time. They bought Higuain in a similar window, and then a season after they buy Benzema. Ronaldo, Kaká, all those guys. I think he'd actually have a very good synergy with Kaká. I know he'd have a fantastic synergy with Cristiano Ronaldo because those two games fit like a glove. So yeah, that's how I end up envisioning that to go. So yeah, that's pretty much how I imagine it. And I still think he'd peak as the best player in the world. 35 and 30 is frankly ridiculous. 25 and 30 is frankly ridiculous as well. So he is the best player in the world. It's just that the gap wouldn't be as pronounced had he ended up playing for Real Madrid as a kid as opposed to Barcelona. Because what Barcelona gave him, and they ultimately gave him the platform at club level, were players who fit him, fit his style down to the ground. Now, that would be the perception. Now, I do think he'd have been better at international level had he developed as a number 10 in Argentina, but that's a whole different conversation. So, that is Messi if he had not gone to Barcelona and instead gone to Real Madrid. There are a few other questions that I'll probably address in TikTok, namely about Ronaldinho and Neymar. That's a really hashed debate that we've seen over and over. 15 Neymar against Mbappe. I think Mbappe is better than peak Neymar. Forget 2015 Neymar. But those are questions for another time, which I probably will address as a TikTok. But in the meantime, that's it for today. I tried to keep it relatively short, 45 minutes. I don't know. Maybe they'll go longer. Maybe they'll be shorter in later time periods. I don't particularly know. Just depends on what I feel like talking about today. I'm also a bit of a rambler, as you probably have gathered if you've watched my TikToks and if you've ended up watching it through here. So, that's it for today. My social tag is the same everywhere. MUSS_J10. Twitter, TikTok, whatever you want. So, on there, I will be aiming to do this weekly. So, I'll see you next time.